All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope everyone is trying to stay safe and cool as most of the country is breaking these heat records. It's ridiculous, almost across half the country. Today we're going to begin with our third remote deposit capture webinar. We're proud to present this to you today. It's titled, Developing a Structured RDC Customer Annual Review Process. My name is Jennifer, and I am the Marketing and Business Development Manager here at UniLink. And in the event that you may be unfamiliar with our company, we're going to start off the presentation with our National Sales Manager, Vince Tellini. He's going to briefly show you how our company can help you with your RDC risk management and sales process. Then we're going to pass the presentation along to our partner and remote deposit specialist, Carolyn Dowdy. And finally, we'll wrap up with questions and our webinar giveaway. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type them in your questions box at any time, and we will have time at the end of the presentation to answer those for you. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the presentation over to Vince. Vince?
Thanks, Jennifer, and thank you, everyone, for attending. We find that the more of these webinars that we do, they get even more and more informative. So continue to stay tuned for the different webinars that we've got planned for the future, and hope you'll enjoy what we've got for you today. To talk a couple of different things, when we're talking with a lot of our customers, we try to find ways to improve our value add for their remote deposit capture program, and we've got a couple of products listed above here. First off, refurbished equipment. That can save you up to 75% versus the cost of going new. So it's really an option for you. We've got different models of scanners available, from Digital Check TS230s to Panini MyVision X's. And also we also carry up some financial printers as well, Epson being one of the more favored on that side of things. So just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that refurbished option. We do have manufacturer-trained technicians on staff. We also provide a manufacturer-matched standard warranty. So if Panini's new are a 6-month warranty, we'll give you a new 6-month warranty. If Digital Check is a 1-year, we'll give you a 1-year warranty on that refurbished equipment. It comes in looking to you like pristine condition, boxed in a UniLink box with sealed, as well as you won't believe the condition when you take a look at it. They really are very, very good. So think of that as an option for your remote deposit capture program. The other item I'd like to talk to you about is the RD Check Safe. Byproduct of remote deposit capture is, what should I do with the paper checks now that I've scanned them at the merchant level? And many RDC users are not prepared for this byproduct. Instead of suggestions like envelopes or simply letting them figure it out, why not deploy a dedicated paper check storage device, a secure cabinet designed for only one reason: temporary paper check storage for remote deposit capture users. Be ahead of the curve and help mitigate RDC operational risk at the client side. So how does it work? Well, once a deposit's been successfully transmitted to the bank, the checks are dropped face down through the slot into a bin that resides in the storage device. A deposit separator is placed after the last check to separate drops by deposit, day, etc. for ease of research. There are 3 bins that are rotated as you determine, allowing for storage of up to 2,400 checks. And a timer is also provided that will alert you when it's time to rotate or destroy the oldest held checks. Some of the benefits of this are risk mitigation. The paper check storage device helps to ensure the safety and integrity of deposited items from the time of receipt until the time of destruction or other voiding. Greater compliance. With many different recommended RDC paper check retention policies existing, a timer on the outside of the device keeps track of the prescribed time period the check should be held before being destroyed and notifies the user when the action is required. And then easier retrieval. If at any time a stored check needs to be retrieved, the separators, the brightly colored separators, make each group of checks easy to find. So we think that's a really cool product. We were working hand in hand with the actual inventor of this as they were getting ready to release it, and we were one of the very first to have this product available. We've got several hundred units of these it's been deployed, and we get rave reviews on this product. So take a look at that on our website. It's www.UniLinkInc.com. Speaking of www.UniLinkInc.com, even the best laid out remote deposit capture programs don't seem to have the expected results. So what can you do to help ensure success? And number one, training, and more training. Train your staff to promote and sell the advantages of remote deposit capture. Here at our webpage, you'll see where we'll be able to provide you with a variety of sales and marketing support solutions. So when you're at our home page, you can simply scroll down and click on the RDC sales support, and we offer PowerPoint or webinar-based sales and product training. Now, I was on a call with another one of the reps talking with a customer about the different options they have for remote deposit capture, and we brought them to this page, and we said, this is one of the biggest drawbacks for most branches. They're all ready to go. They like the idea. They've lined out their program, but yet they seem to fall short when it comes time to actually sell the product. And so he was talking about that, and he's got to create a webinar, and he's got to create some training to make sure his folks had that. And then we brought him up there, and he saw that, and he said, can I take a look at that? And we gave him a couple slides to take a look at. He ordered it on the spot, and literally within a day he called us back and said, you guys saved me 2 days' worth of work on this. So it's one of those things that, you take for granted. You got to put a PowerPoint together. You forget how much time it takes to do that. That's wasted time where you could be focusing your efforts in other areas. So we want to make sure that you take a look at this site, take a look at the different tools that we have available for you to make your job and your program even better. So we also have in that sales and marketing a remote deposit capture video that's available that can be customized to your logo and marketing message. And there are also a number of marketing PDFs that we can create for you to help your program work successfully. And that video, by the way, just speaks generically about the benefits of remote deposit capture. And we could certainly set up a time to demonstrate that video to you. Just simply give us a call at 800-666-2980. My extension is 20. Or if you already know who your rep is, you can simply call them and they'll be able to help you. Or drop me an email at sales@UniLinkInc.com.
And not to mention, Vince, those products are incredibly reasonably priced. Great price on everything. You check out the website, and you'll find it's going to save you days and days of work versus doing it yourself or hiring somebody else to do it. Agreed.
Speaking of great prices,
here's an example.
We've got a webinar special, and this is available only to the webinar attendees. It's the RDC annual audit checklist, and it's a bank internal checklist to verify that certain tasks have been completed annually as it relates to specific customers. For example, maximum list reviewed, site visits and or customer self-assessments completed, review of loan and deposit transaction history, credit ran and evaluated, and the list goes on and on. Right now that's on special for $19.95. You can simply give us a call at the number listed there, 800-666-2980, extension 20, or drop me an email at sales@UniLinkInc.com, and we'll be happy to place that order for you. Next up is Carolyn Dowdy, and Carolyn is the founder of RemoteDepositStore.com and president of Bank Project Solutions. She has more than 25 years in banking experience as a bank consultant. Her primary focus is on implementing remote deposit capture training and establishing compliance in financial institutions. Also, during her career, she has been a part of senior management in 2 new startup banks in Georgia. So, Carolyn, why don't you take it away?
Thank you very much, Vince. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar. I thought it was important to go over the purpose of the presentation and establishing annual and/or periodic individual customers' evaluation reviews. And it's really important to understand that each financial institution, they're different in their sizes and complexity. And also their system capabilities and attributes are different. And what we mean by that is when you are putting together your annual review and/or your periodic review, there are a lot of information that you can get out of your system, but sometimes you have to support this process manually. For example, if you need to keep up with how many NSFs the customers had or the dollar volume or their chargebacks or if they're paying their loans promptly. These types of things you would want to keep up with maybe on a spreadsheet. And then a lot of the institutions have custom report writers where they can pull in this information. So if your system, your remote deposit system, is not interfaced such as with your BSA to see if your customer maybe has accelerated to a medium risk BSA, some of those things you would have to manually take care of. And also your risk tolerances of institutions differ. And this results in differences in the depth of the policies, procedures, processes, and controls. For example, some institutions may say when they set up their policy that's approved by their board, they may say, well, we're just going to set up low-risk RDC customers. They have low volume, they're low-risk BSA. But other institutions may say, well, we're going to set up all of them. We're going to set up low, medium, and high-risk customers. And, of course, the depth of your policies and procedures are going to be more in-depth than institutions maybe that have set up low-risk customers. So it's important to think about that when you're setting up your annual review and or periodic. Understand the approach and methodologies of institutions may differ. As the saying goes, there is more than one way to get to the end of the road. Today, the topics we're going to cover is what is the purpose of an annual or periodic review. And then we're going to talk about who should we assign the internal responsibilities. Is it going to be your treasury manager, ops officer, or maybe your RDC coordinator? What criteria should we consider during these evaluations and reviews? And then we're going to talk about what supporting documentation might be considered. It's not an all-inclusive list, but we're going to give you some really important documents that you should have as a basics anyway. And then how do policies, procedures, and processes factor into the examinations? Now, when we talk about the examinations, we're going to spend more time on the BSA for electronic banking because a lot of times the smaller institutions I know that I deal with, sometimes they don't think about that, but that's going to be a priority when you have your BSA audit and or your examinations. And then at the end, we're going to have webinar resources. What are the purposes for your RDC annual and or periodic review? Well, the purposes include, but are not limited to, mitigating the institution's various risks to include fraud, money laundering, and nefarious activity and information security. When we think about fraud at the customer side, for example, you could have an office manager who alters the payee on the checks, or you could have, a small company send through the file twice, and you'd have a duplicate file. So there's things that can occur in fraud. And then money laundering we're all, aware of because of BSA and the terrorist activity. And also we have to think about the information security. Information security is going to be securing their systems, their antivirus. It's going to be destroying checks timely per your contract, and also securing the checks, but also destroying the checks according to whatever the bank's outlined with the customer. And then supporting established policies, procedures, controls, and processes. And then supporting ongoing BSA monitoring, which we know includes OFAC requirements and your CIP. Your CIP is your Customer Information Program. When the customers originally set up their account with the bank, they should have already gone through your Customer Information Program, and then they should have already been OFAC, the entity, and also the principals of the companies. And then sustaining the reoccurring customer due diligence requirements, and which includes the evaluation of the RDC's customers' credit-worthiness, because you're going to have to set up reoccurring due diligence for these customers. We don't just set them up on our books initially and approve them and go through whatever our underwriting and evaluation process is and then forget about them. Because as you know, customers' creditworthiness can deteriorate, or also they, you might have set them up as a low BSA and all of a sudden you're getting a lot of CTRs and you're having to fill out a suspicious activity report. So if things like that happen, then you may trigger a periodic review. You may want to go on a site visit. And then complying with applicable laws and the RDC guidance. Assigning internal responsibilities during your annual review. Annual and our periodic review responsibilities, they depend on your established staffing structure of your institution. It also depends on, if you're a smaller or a larger institution, your staffing's going to differ. Whoever you assign responsibilities out to is going to differ because, institutions sometimes have a department head that just handles one factor of it. You may have someone in your institution that just does the customer training and the installation. You're going to have someone that does the underwriting and evaluation. You're going to have your backroom processes. You want to utilize an integrated team approach, and that wording is directly from the guidance. And as appropriate, it depends on the task, their job description, and your approval authority pursuant to the institution's policy. When we talk about the authority, you want to make sure when you do your initial customer evaluation and underwriting and due diligence that someone signs off that has been approved by your board that has the authority to authorize those customers being set up. But as you establish your maximum limits and other things that may come up periodically, you also need to have someone sign off on that has been approved by your board or your senior management. Now, some of the titles that are given are Remote Deposit Capture Services Officer. Well, you may not call the person that is over and coordinating your program the RDC Services Officer. It may be your treasury manager. A lot of institutions have appointed treasury managers to be over these functions. But in smaller institutions, sometimes we don't always have the luxury of having a treasury manager or an assigned RDC officer. We just assign it all to the operations officer. So it's going to be different in different institutions. And then how do our lenders and underwriters work into this? Well, if you think about it, your deposit operations personnel and usually your treasury manager or your RDC services officer, they haven't been trained in evaluating customers for creditworthiness. They haven't been trained in looking at financials and maybe credit reports. So your lenders and underwriters are going to come into play. Who's going to be your assigned site visit personnel? It's very important that they're trained and that you have a site visit person that is training your customers, especially on information security, because I'm sure all of you have the new supplement of authentication in Internet banking environment, the new release that comes out, and everything's got to be implemented by January 1st. You've got to think about, are you really stressing to those customers about protecting information? And then your IT personnel is appropriate. They're going to play into this too because your people, your RDC officer, if you've assigned one, or your treasury manager or your operations officer, they may not be familiar with all the authentication methods and antiviruses and all the things that the customer needs to have to really secure their site. So your IT personnel need to be involved. And then, of course, our BSA officers. They have got to be involved in this, and BSA officers, you're going to be, audited maybe during the RDC and IT exam. They're probably going to look at your BSA procedures and also during your independent BSA exams and or audits. So BSA's got to be involved in this, and then there's others as appropriate for the function. Now, some of the activities considered during your RDC customers review. Now, this review can be done on an annual basis. You may, if you've got 200 customers, you may rotate their anniversary date to do their review. And then as things come up, you may have periodic reviews. Your periodic review may be monthly, quarterly. You may have a customer you're watching. So there may be periodic reviews that come up. So what I recommend is that you assign a central point to receive your due diligence information. That person may be your RDC coordinator, your treasury manager, operations officer, whoever's been assigned. But I strongly recommend during these reviews and keeping up with customers that you have a central point, because you're going to have your BSA officer communicating with you about whether they're low, medium, or high BSA, or you watching them. Then you're going to have your IT person that might have reviewed your site visit and or customer self-assessment, and they may say, well, the customer's not really securing the information when we went out and visited the site. Then you're going to develop or complete an annual review or periodic worksheet. And then you've got to think about if you're up in their limits or you have some kind of problem with the customer, you may have to receive authority to change their maximum limits. You might have lowered them because you feel like you have some exposure with that customer. And then, again, you may have a customer that you've got some problems with. Maybe they have a ZAR filed on them. And maybe your top management recommended, or your BSA officer, that you terminate that customer. Well, if you terminate that customer, you need to go back to your RDC contract and find out what the termination process is and go by that. So there may be someone in your institution that has to sign off on that. Then you want to review your current policies, procedures, and processes, which include the initial established customer due diligence procedures, and also that would be your underwriting. When you go back to these policies that should already have been established, you can take from that and develop your annual review and/or your periodic review checklist. And from the information, start developing a reoccurring annual and/or periodic customer due diligence process. And then think about, based on your low, medium, or high risk RDC and BSA. We talked about this in earlier webinars. Some banks may have a low, medium, and high risk criteria for RDC customers, and then you have your BSA low, medium, and high risk that was probably originally established when you set up the customer's account. Some banks have two different risk ratings on these customers, and some banks have integrated their BSA low, medium, and high risk into their RDC. And then you want to develop the customer's annual and/or periodic review worksheet. This becomes part of your policies and procedures. Now remember, BSA monitoring will be continuous, ongoing as part of your BSA program, and we talked about that. Because a lot of banks have some kind of software that tracks and gives them exception reports and watch reports on these customers. So this is going to be an ongoing process, but the main thing is to communicate with your BSA officer and make sure they're feeding back to your central RDC person. And then you want to consider the following criteria for the annual and/or periodic review of the customer. Perform a risk rating system process, as we talked about, low, medium, and high risk. Are we going to obtain financials as appropriate? For example, some banks may say, well, we're just setting up low-risk customers, and they're really low volume and they're low BSA, so we're just going to run credit on them and do some other due diligence, site visits, or whatever. But if you get into medium and high volume customers, and a lot of this depends on the size of your institution, you're going to look at the financials. And what I mean, the size of the institution, for your risk tolerance, if you're a little small bank, you may say that $10,000 or $20,000 a month volume is high. But if you're in a several billion-dollar institution, you would say, maybe $50,000 or $100,000 is a high volume. So it depends on the risk tolerances of your bank and how you've written the procedures for your underwriting and due diligence process. And then you want to obtain a credit score. You want to run personal credit on these principals of these merchants or commercial customers. Probably that you're required, because they're a consumer, that you've got to get their authorization to run this background or this credit on them. And then when it's appropriate for the business, you want to obtain the Dun & Bradstreet report. Now, the Dun & Bradstreet report would be on the business, and all businesses do not pay to be part of Dun & Bradstreet. So if you cannot run a credit report on Dun & Bradstreet, then you're going to be depending on the personal credit and the financials of the principals, but also you may consider the financials of that company. Also, you want to consider the years in business for your commercial customers. When you initially evaluate your customer, you're going to consider how long they've been in business and how long they've been your customer. But also during that review process, periodic review or annual, you also want to think about that. And then you want to review the customer's transaction activities and verify the type of activities that parallel with the type of business transactions. For example, I've used a flower shop. A customer may come in and they apply for RDC in their flower shop, and they tell you we're going to only accept checks that are $9.99 up to maybe $200 or $300. And then when you set them up, all of a sudden your BSA officer is reviewing them, or whoever is doing that review, and they say, well, you know, this customer is started sending $500,000, $3,000, $5,000 checks. They're sending in cashier's checks. They're just not doing what we thought they were going to do at the initial setup. You know, they've changed their business. And what they're doing doesn't seem to parallel with a flower shop. So that would be a red flag probably for BSA or some type of criminal activity. It could be that the customers change their business and they're just making lots of money, but you might want to trigger a periodic site visit. And then also review their deposit and loan history. You know, we've talked about, you know, review their deposits, but also you got to think about their loan history. If you've got a customer in the loan department and they maybe are a couple months behind on their loans, your lenders should be reporting that back to your central person that's doing these reviews, because obviously their credit is deteriorating, and this could, you know, expose the bank to a loss because maybe the customer's going to go bankrupt. And sometimes during this environment, customers will do things that they usually wouldn't do fraudulently. And so we really have to watch that. And you have to train your lenders to communicate with your central person. Another example could be that if you're the central person that's keeping up with these customers, that you require them, the lenders, to send you a report on all your RDC customers to know their loans are up to date. Also review the historical information, such as, are they having excessive chargebacks? Well, that information would come from your operations department. Are they having a lot of NSS? Or all of a sudden they're exceeding their maximum dollar volumes or units that you've established? Your units would be number of items. If they told you they're going to be running through probably no more than 100 items a month, and they start running 200 or 300 items a month, you want to look at them closer. Maybe their business is doing well, but maybe they've become a money service company. So you have to watch that and have someone feed back to you. They've got excessive duplicate items. You know, you're watching reports and you've got your monitoring in your back room, and you know that you've had a situation with a customer that had a duplicate file. It might have been just a mistake, but you've got to watch those customers closer. Customer service issues reported. Well, you need a central person that knows about any complaints that have come in. You want to know if they've had problems with images, or they having problems with their equipment, things like that, because you could possibly have a loss if you have an image problem, because you won't be able to maybe tell that image. If you had a court case, you'd have to pull that image, and it's not a real clear. Maybe the payee had been altered, but of course on these check images you can't tell. Also, you've got to have consider your BSA issues, which we talked about, and have your BSA officer report back to you and keep you up to date on what's going on with the customer. We've talked about BSA issues and communicate with the BSA officer. Examples would be all of a sudden the customer is having several CTRs filed. They're bringing in lots of cash at the counter, over $10,000. Something's going on with the customer, and you decided management decided whatever your process is, that a ZAR had to be filed. That should immediately go back to your central person that's doing your reviews and keeping up with the customer. And then you want to review any changes in your business structure, which includes additions or changes in your principles. If you have, I don't know what all institutions do, if you set up a business and then they come in and say, we're changing our business name, or we've been merged with someone else, you may require them to close that business account and reopen. Of course, all your CIP, when they open the new account, is going to be done on the entity and the principals. But what if you get a legal document that says they've had a formal name change? Well, still, at that point, it might have skipped the CIP process and the OFAC from the new account, because you're just making a change. You need to have some process in place where that you're OFAC'd, and maybe they've added some new principles. They've also changed the name, so you want to make sure that gets OFAC'd. as appropriate? And also, was the credit report obtained, and did you get proper resolutions updated, and was your CIP process performed? If you implement and it's appropriate for your risk, and that comes out of your financial institution-led or risk management remote deposit capture, you may have site visits and our customer self-assessments to evaluate your RDC customers' IT infrastructure and risk management processes. You've got to make a decision, which you all know, of when you're going to do site visits and customer self-assessments. If you do a periodic review and you've got some kind of problem going on, you might do a site visit. Some institutions, smaller institutions I've noticed, do site visits before they ever set up a customer, but in the guidance it says if risk warrants it. But I think it would behoove the institution to do an initial site visit. And then the customer self-assessment is very helpful, because a lot of the customer could actually fill out a questionnaire and send it back to you. If you have a lot of volumes of customers and you do want to keep up with how they're protecting the information and destroying at their site, and also if they're out of town, you may have your corporate office local, and then you may have an office in California or Arizona. You can send out those customer self-assessments and make sure that the customer knows that they've got to keep these certain controls in place. So when you get those documents back, your IT person could review them for the information security questions, and then your BSA officer and other control officer would review these forms, and then you would make a decision if you need to do something about this customer. Maybe you're feeling uncomfortable with them. You also want to think about verifying the location of the customer's scanners, their number of scanners shipped, and reconcile the scanners by serial number. I noticed that a lot of small institutions, to be competitive, they're giving away scanners. Well, if you've got 100, 200 scanners out in the marketplace, you need to be keeping some kind of control list of where they are, because when you have your audit for your fixed assets, you may have $100,000 on your books. So your auditors are going to want to know, do you know where this equipment is? So you need to have a central list and be able to show them that. You want to confirm authorized approvals are in file and exceeded maximums. You want to have a written form, whoever you've assigned in your policy or your procedures that has the authorization to sign off for you to up their limits. You need to make sure that you've got that in file during that annual review. And then verify authorized maximum limits are set up correctly on your system. There could be a time that someone went in and maintenance and upped the maximum limit, but they didn't. They told the customer it's going to up it, but it might not have got it updated properly on the system. If you go in on your customer, some banks may go in and set everyone up for a certain limit that's not reasonable. You're going to get dinged when you have your exam. This is one of the major findings that they've had. Some banks may go in and say, well, we're going to set everybody up for $30,000 and then we don't have to worry about it. Well, this needs to be on a customer level according to that customer's volume and what you've evaluated on them. Confirm the RDC's customers' authorized changes are in file. You want to verify the authorized signers on the resolution, and any updated contracts are executed and in file. I noticed that when I go out to some institutions that most of them have a platform system, so when they set up the depository account, it prints out a resolution. You state on there who's authorized for that company to sign certain contracts, who's authorized to sign loans, who's authorized to open accounts, who's authorized to set up safe deposit boxes. But you also need to look at that resolution and make sure that you put on there, maybe in there's a section called Other usually, and make sure you know who's authorized to execute your RDC agreement with the bank. You have the same situation on your cash management system in ACH originations. When you're signing these contracts, you need to know by resolution who that company's authorized to enter that contract with the bank. So be sure that those are in file and that you've looked at them. And also, if you've had to update your contracts because you've had compliance changes or you've strengthened the information security wording per your attorney's direction, you want to make sure that these contracts are re-signed if you change them. But if your contract with the customer says that you only have to mail out a letter with the changes, you don't have to have them all re-signed, you need to have some way to track these letters to make sure they got out. And that's going to be really important with this new supplement that come out that you've got to be implemented by January 1st about authentication, because there's a lot of lawsuits now for corporate takeover, whatever. You know, you have to worry about that more in your ACH origination, but you've got to think about if customers are storing these images out on their systems, those images are non-public information. So the customers could actually have their system compromised, and they would lose all those images, and crooks would have all the customers' account numbers, names, and things like that. So you want to be real sure that you've got a really strong contract that your attorneys look through to help protect the bank as much as possible. And then also some banks are using the Visa MasterCharge Terminated Merchants Report or check systems when appropriate to the customer. You can probably get a hold of that Visa MasterCharge Terminated Merchants, because when you initially set up the customer or you're doing an annual review, you're going to want to know if that customer's been terminated at another bank for some reason. They might have been committing fraud, so then they come to your little small institution to set up shop. So your institution could be exposed to losses and also be involved in criminal activity, your customers. So you want to be really sure that you monitor that. And then as far as consider PCI compliance, payment card industry, guidance on what you have to do to be PCI compliant. Well, if you're setting up ACH check conversion, some banks have a point-of-sale terminal out at a customer, and that terminal will also accept a check and convert it to an ACH item. They may have a PCI compliance report, and their systems have penetration tests or whatever. So when you do their annual review and or their site visit or whatever, you could actually ask them for that PCI compliance verification. But all, of course, that are on Check 21 that, for check image, they're probably not going to have that PCI compliance. But if they get into that ACH conversion, those point-of-sale terminals, that might be something they have. And then you want to review sufficiency of the RDC's customer staff. If you're setting up really large, complex companies, a lot of you, if you're small community banks, you may not set up really complex, high-dollar volume customers. But if you set up like the IBMs of the world or some of these large companies, you're going to have more due diligence you have to do on reviewing their customer staffing. And so that's sort of a gray area that you have to monitor as an institution, because you are probably not going to be as diligent in finding out their employee turnover and all those other things that's in the guidance. But if you're in a really large shop with a lot of exposure there, you're going to have to be more diligent about that. The documentation to consider during your reviews. Well, we've already talked about we want to develop an annual review and then a periodic worksheet. And that could be some kind of checklist. And the reason that we want to set up these checklists is because it forces you to be consistent in your reviews, and it looks really good to your examiners and independent auditors, plus it mitigates the institution's risk. So you want to set up some kind of worksheet. Also, you want to have some kind of RDC approval authorization form, because as you know, if someone's sent in a file and they're going over their maximum limit, you need to have someone sign off that's authorized for you to send that file. Now, you may say in your policy that the person that's authorized can send you an email and you can print it out or save it somewhere and show that you did get authorization. But I would make sure that's in my policy. If you're, some banks always require that authorization form to be in writing in a form. But some institutions may say, well, we'll just let that person that's authorized send us an email. So just make sure it's in your policy and procedures. And then also very important is your RDC customer add, change, and delete system maintenance form. And this is signed by your authorized customer, because if you add someone to RDC or you make some kind of change or delete something on the system, You want to make sure that the customer is giving you guidance, and then if it's required an authorized banker to sign, of course, whoever's setting that up needs to sign it. And then your RDC customer level management reports to determine current status of the customer's relationship. You really need to have a management report. This is my recommendation for the central person to keep up with, is maybe to set up some kind of Excel spreadsheet and have columns on it. And in those columns you would have, the customer's ID number, their account numbers involved, the customer's name. You would have on there their BSA status. Are they low, medium, and high BSA? You would have on there what their dollar and number of chargebacks have been during the period. And also their NSFs, because you want to keep up, are they having are they excessively insufficient? And then you want to know if they ever had any duplicate item files come in. And then you want to keep up with, are they past due on their loan? You might have a column that says they're current, but then if they're getting a month behind, then you know that something's happening with that customer. Liquidity-wise, they may not have the ability to pay. So this may trigger you to do a periodic review of that customer or a reevaluation of their maximum limits. And then you want to keep up on that sheet any customer issues and complaints. Now, the only way that you're going to find out about those complaints is if you have them flow back to a central person that keeps them on a worksheet. You're not going to know they're having image or scanner problems or whatever. Because if you appear to the customer that you are not addressing these things and they get out in the community and talk about, they just don't give good service, well, then that could hurt the reputation of the bank. So I strongly suggest you have a central place to accumulate this information, because you also may have a third-party service provider that's providing support to these customers. And you want to keep up with that third party and make sure they're giving good service if you've assigned them to do that. And then there may be other documentation and reports as determined for use in your process, because you're going to have different reports that you can pull from your RDC system. So I would go back to your providers and find out all the different reports that are available to you that you want to utilize during this annual review or periodic review. And then also if your RDC is through your core, or your core may be able to keep up some reports. The other thing is, we talked about these custom report writers. You may be able to do a custom report and pull the customer's NSF information, whether they're delinquent on their loans, their chargebacks. You may be able to pull that in a custom report. Now we're going to talk about your adequacy of policies, procedures, processes during examinations. And in the beginning I told you that we were going to talk more on BSA. But you've got to think about, too, that during your BSA exam or audit, or during your IT audit may be when they do your RDC or your electronic banking products examination. They're going to pull transactions, and they're also going to look at your bank as a whole, enterprise-wide, because they're going to be trying to figure out your risk profile as a bank and your volumes. But it's really important also that you think about BSA. If we've got BSA officers on here, and if they're not on the line, you need to make sure that they read the section in the BSA handbook. When you go to the BSA handbook, you can search remote deposit capture, but also search what the examiners will be doing for electronic products, because RDC is an electronic product and it's also a payment system. So testing transactions during a BSA examination include a sample of your e-banking accounts, which include RDC. So when your BSA officer does their risk assessment, they're going to do a risk assessment on all your different electronic banking products, which they should already have RDC on that risk assessment for BSA. The review includes bank's risk assessment of its e-banking activities. Electronic banking, RDC comes under that. And then they're going to look at your prior examination findings and your audit reports. They're going to look at, see where your weaknesses are that your independent reviewers found. So you need to be sure if you're independent BSA examiners that should already have RDC on the audit plan. You should also have it on your, I don't know, some of you may have your IT independent reviewers also looking at RDC in your processes. So you need to make sure that you address those exceptions that are written up, because when the examiners come in, they're not only going to look at you themselves, they're also going to go back on all these other examinations and audits, and they're going to see where the weaknesses were. And if you haven't cleared them up, you're going to get dinged during that exam. And then from the sample, examiners perform the following procedures. They're going to review your account opening documentation, including your CIP program. They're going to look at your ongoing customer due diligence process. They're going to review the customer's transaction history. And then they're going to compare the expected activity with their actual activity. Remember, we talked about when you set up the customer, they said they're going to, their maximum they're going to run through is 100 items a month, and the maximum dollar amount is going to be from $9.99 to $1.99 or whatever it is. They're going to look at that activity and see if the customer's doing something different than what they told you they were going to do. And then they're going to determine if the activity is consistent with the nature of the customer's business, and then they're going to identify any unusual or suspicious activity. On the basis of that RDC examination scope and testing results, the examiners will form a conclusion on the adequacy of your policies, procedures, and processes associated with e-banking relationships, which include your RDC. So, for example, if they go back to your policies and procedures and they feel like that they aren't adequate, that you're not doing enough due diligence, because you might have set up one due diligence process for all RDC customers, whether they were low, medium, or high. You might have said, we're just going to run credit on them. We're going to do a risk, low, medium, high risk, but we're just going to run credit on the customers, and we're really not going to look at the financials of the institution, of the merchant. So they're going to tell you if they're not adequate, if you're not doing enough, and it's really important that you go back and strengthen your program and have these approved by your board. And also I wanted to mention that here's some other reference material. Refer to other examination considerations that include, but they're not limited to, your OFAC requirements and other requirements pursuant to the financial institution letter, risk management, remote deposit capture. If you go back to that financial institution letter that was published back, I believe, January 2009, it's only 9 pages long, but there's a lot of footnotes in there that refers you back to all the FFIEC IT handbooks. Retail payment systems are really important. If you go back to the retail payment systems FFIEC IT handbook, there's a Tier 1 and Tier 2 examination questions in there. And the examiner can trigger just the Tier 1 exam because he feels like you're a low-risk profile institution, or they can trigger the Tier 1 and Tier 2 exam, or a combination of anything in there, any question. And so you want to, that Tier 2 exam, the Tier 2 examination questions are very in-depth of things they want to see. Just for example, one thing is they're going to want to see the topography of your, or a diagram of your systems. They want to see how it's connected. Are you going in through a core? Are you sending to the Fed? Are you going through other third parties? They're going to want you to be able to explain all that. So it's very important you go back and read those questions to prepare. And also the e-banking or electronic banking FFIEC handbooks has a lot of good information in it. If you go into that section on risk management, there's a lot of good things in there that will help you on your bank-wide risk assessment for RDC. And then there's other FFIEC handbooks, including information security and outsourcing. If you were outsourcing, this is on the enterprise-wide level, but if you're outsourcing, you want to make sure that you go in and read that section on outsourcing to third parties. In conclusion, as we talked about in the beginning, all institutions are not created equal. So it depends on, what your risk tolerances are, of how in-depth your policies and procedures and everything have to be, and what your risk profile is when the examiners come in and look at you. They're going to establish, as we said, whether you're a high-risk institution. You know, you're setting up high-dollar volumes that are coming in. You're dealing with big companies. And also, if you are setting up high-risk type companies as far as BSA, they're going to look at the depth of your program policies, procedures, processes, and controls, and they're going to correlate that with the risk to the institution. And sometimes, you know, we feel like that this is overkill, but if you think about it, if you have a huge loss to the institution, it directly affects the safety and soundness of your institution. And if you get in a lawsuit, even if it's not your problem, like, you know, we're reading now about security for corporate takeovers, now they can get past your multi-factor authentication, like for your ACH origination and your wires. If you have a huge loss or get in a lawsuit, your bank may lose millions of dollars. So it's very important that you think about that, because the examiners want to be sure that they protect that institution. Use your current initial due diligence criteria. Please refer to the FFA CIT handbooks, and your BSA handbook is appropriate, and refer to your risk measurement remote deposit capture to develop your reoccurring annual and/or periodic review of the customer. And right there I'm talking about on the customer level for that review. And remember, too, that your examiners will do sampling of your RDC customers. And then the depth of due diligence and your underwriting for higher risk activities such as pouch transactions, which if you're all really small institutions, I doubt you get into these pouch transactions with foreign correspondents, or foreign businesses also are higher risk. So you should be very careful and develop really in-depth due diligence and underwriting, and make sure that on these companies that you've got your attorney involved to review to protect the bank, and make sure that you've got this integrated in your BSA review. Some resources that you can go back to are the electronic banking FFIC book and your retail payment systems. Be sure you read your BSA handbook. Go back to risk measurement remote deposit capture. And then some of the things that I recommend of how I would handle an annual review is Bank Project Solutions. And just remember, there are many methodologies used in the annual evaluation process. You need to work with your compliance department when you develop this, and make sure your BSA officer is involved. And I thank you very much today, and I hope this was helpful.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, for being with us today. I'm just going to go to the next slide real quick for those of you, if you want to write this information down on our webinar special. For those of you who are on the phone portion only, it's the Remote Deposit Capture Annual Audit Checklist. It's $19.95, and the product code is RDC-U-RDS118. All right, so now if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in your questions box, and we'll go ahead and get those answered for you. Let's check out the questions that we have here. And Carolyn or Vince or I will be able to answer those for you. Oh, both questions are if you can get a copy of the presentation. And of course you can. You can either email or call any of that information on there. If you've been emailing back and forth with me, Jennifer@UniLinkInc.com, you can do that as well. If you see on the last slide here, we also have our next webinar set up. It's Is Your Team Ready for an RDC Exam? It's going to be held on October 4th and 6th. Some of the topics are: what examination questions might we expect and what they mean? What specific responsibilities should senior management and department heads be aware of? Are you aware of the differences between a Tier 1 and Tier 2 exam? What documentation should we have available? What are some of the top examination findings during 2011 RDC exams? And while we're on that topic, we do have our previous 2 webinars posted on our website. We are recording this one. We'll have this one available afterwards. If you'd like me to send you the link, I will go ahead and do that. Again, feel free to contact any of that information on your screen, 1-800-666-2980. You can contact us at any time. And I can also show you on our website, if you go to the webinars link, you can see our previous 2 webinars with Carolyn, which cover the topics of site visits and customer self-assessments, which she has mentioned on this webinar. So it doesn't, oh, it looks like one more question came in. Let's see here. Carolyn, this is for you. Do you get comments about the review being too time-intensive and unreal expectations of the examiners?
I have, some of the institutions that have given me feedback on that, I have dealt with and consulted, and they've got really strong programs in. They do site visits. They set up their low, medium, and high-risk customers, and they haven't got a lot of criticism. I can tell you some of the things that the examiners are focusing on is that banks, setting up limits that are appropriate for the customers, and then they want them to do, they have weak monitoring. For example, they may not be monitoring these customers' images, for BSA or whatever. So I haven't had a lot of problems saying that they're having a problem with the examiner, the ones that I've got feedback on. But I will go over in the next webinar what the weaknesses are that they're seeing when they go in. But it is, the main thing is that if you are set up as a higher risk profile institution and you're doing large volumes, let's say you have over, this is an example, but if you have over 50 RDC customers and you don't have a strong underwriting and a due diligence program in there, and you're not some way keeping up with what the customers are doing about destroying these checks and securing them and things like that, you're going to get dinged from the examiners. And you should be sure to get these customers on your audit plans. Make sure these RDC customers are on your BSA audit, and make sure it's on your IT audit if they're the ones doing your RDC independent review. Now, some of the regional organizations for ACH are doing the RDC exams, audits. So just be real sure you've got them on the audit plan, and that way you will be prepared when the examiners come in. And I hope I answered your question.
All right, we have another question. What is considered sufficient review of images? Would spot checks be considered suffice, or is it expected to review all images?
What I would do, this is my opinion, but the bank has to decide for their risk tolerances. What I've seen some institutions do is they set up a enterprise-wide amount. For example, it's a smaller bank though, they set up criteria of what they're going to review on that image, and they set it up for $10,000 deposits or more. They go back to they have some kind of report that comes out, and this would be monitoring. And so they say any deposit over $10,000, we're going to look at it, and we're going to look at the images and see what the customers are sending in. They would look at the payee, for example. Let's say in your contract, if you say, with your contract with you and the customer, that you say, we are not going to accept third-party checks into RDC. And some banks say we are, but most of them say they do not. So if you're doing that enterprise-wide review of all deposits over $10,000, you would look at the payee, and you would check and see if that check's payable to the way that business account is titled, or are those customers sending through checks payable to other people and they're endorsing them on the back. You want to look at your endorsements on the back. If you're accepting third-party checks, you want to be sure, if you've accepted that risk, that you're going to accept them. You want to make sure they're endorsed properly on the back if they're running them through, because you're going to have a problem. You want to make sure the dollar amount and the written amount's the same, which that, should be, some of that is called in your image software. You could have reports that kick out also from your RDC provider that tell you certain things that you need to check. You've got reports that come out that say these are duplicate items. You need to immediately address that. So you need to set up the criteria of what you're going to review. Don't just put in your policy, well, we're going to look at all deposits $10,000 or over $10,000, or we're going to look at all deposits that are $50,000 or over. Well, some banks may not want to look at all of them over 10 because it takes too much time. But they may say, hey, we're going to set $50,000 as the target point. that bank would have a different risk tolerance that they would accept than another bank. So set up an enterprise-wide amount that you're going to set up, and you're going to look at all of them. And then if the customer goes over their maximum amount on the customer level, then you may set up some kind of process to look at those. But that's something that you'd have to talk to your management about.
Okay, again, if anybody thinks of any questions later, feel free to contact us at any time. We will have Carolyn put those answers into a PDF for us, and we'll follow up with that information. Again, we'll be happy to provide a copy of the PowerPoint and a link to the recording. If you would like, just go ahead and email or give us a call. And we hope everyone has a nice day. And again, please stay cool on this hot summer day. Have a nice day.